IVM.
Hey everybody, welcome to another week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. As we head into week 4 of lockdown, we're doing our best to make sure that we maintain our schedules and try and get you as many of the podcasts that you're used to listening as we possibly can, but beg your indulgence if there are any slippages in schedules and times. With that, let's just get on with your show.
Hey everybody, welcome to Football Shootball with Shiva, with Orav, with Kartik, and with me, John Dykes.
And we are so excited, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, or when y'all were boys and girls in the early 90s, the voice you just heard was of the most famous football presenter for us in the Indian subcontinent and probably Southeast Asia as well. On ESPN Star Sports, it's JD that's just as good without the Coke. We have the John Dykes on Football Shootball this week and the next. Hey, John, welcome to Football Shootball.
Hey guys, it's fantastic to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It's great. How are you doing in Singapore? Like, what's the scene with the John Dykes show? How are things there? Hope your family is well.
Yeah, thanks very much, and the same to all of you. Obviously difficult times. What we do is we have a thrice weekly show, the John Dykes Show on Fox Sports, which is, if you caught it, it's a chat show. Basically, it's us working our way through the big issues of the day, working through headlines, occasionally breaking into sort of feature material. So, funnily enough, when this whole lockdown, although in Singapore they're calling it a circuit breaker, it's a sort of short, sharp shock to try and halt the spread of the pandemic. When this came along, it didn't disrupt me as much as, for example, what it would have done somebody who was working on live sports, whether you're covering, as we do on Fox, the Bundesliga, or if it's Formula One or tennis, golf, anything like that. In my case, it didn't call for too much of a departure from what we normally do, which is editorialized, which is going through news, which is analyzing, reading between the lines, looking behind headlines, interviewing guests from a distance, which is what we do anyway via Skype calls or whatever technology we have. So we've carried on. We obviously have restrictions. I go into the studios. We still broadcast from the studio. This is just me at home. You can see behind me, I've got a couple of pictures you'll probably want to ask me about later on. But I go in twice a week. I do a live show on a Monday and a live show on a Wednesday. We pre-record a feature kind of show for a Friday. And we're just trying to keep going. And what's been lovely is that wherever people watch the show, they've been getting in touch with us via our social media pages and saying, keep it coming. Just, we want to talk football.
No, that's fantastic. It's taken me about 10 minutes to get used to the fact that it's your face from here across the screen. And for two of my co-hosts, Shiva and Sapre, it's taking them a little longer because they're still stunned. You can see them with their eyes wide open. And they're like, this is happening, guys.
Yeah, I can't imagine that this day would have come to pass because we grew up, and please pardon my fanboy moment, because we grew up watching you on television, and our love for football began in the early noughties when it was still 2003, 2004. I'm the biggest Arsenal fan I know, so I love the fact that there is, if I'm not wrong, a picture of Henry over your right shoulder. So that just makes my day. I'm going to assume you're also an Arsenal supporter, so thank you for that.
No, I'm not an Arsenal supporter because I'm sure at some point you're going to get around to the inevitable question about who I support. I've got a couple of pictures that I've collected down the years. One of the things that we will discuss, I'm sure, during the course of our chats is the impact that Thierry Henry had on the Premier League, particularly at the time. And you were talking about the noughties then, and obviously in the ESPN context, ESPN Star context, I was over in England watching games a lot, and I saw some of his finest performances. So Henry was always something I really, really admired. And I interviewed him a couple of times, and he gave me a couple of the most provocative, thought-provoking, insightful interviews I've ever done. So I've always had a very soft spot for him. And when I had a chance, I can't remember where it was to get my hands on a signed picture. I just snapped it up, but not because I'm an Arsenal fan.
I love that because we share our love for Thierry Henry. Like when I was growing up, when I was learning football, I was watching football, I was playing football. I would model myself after Thierry Henry's goals. Like he would open his body up and put it in the farthest corner. That would be my dream. So that's just awesome.
So, Shiva, you're fanboying about John Dykes. You're fanboying about Henry. John has said that he loves Henry. Sapre is now slowly starting to seethe over there. John, Gaurav is a Manchester United fan, and he's like, "Come on, guys, give some love for United." Yeah, you're talking about the noughties. It's where we were the most successful. It's almost like give some love for United.
I have heard John use the word Manchester United so often. 2010. There's no other way. There's no other club you can end up following. But one thing that comes to me right now is what I was not prepared for this day. If that I'll be on the screen. Talking with John. Had I known that, I would have improved myself, made myself look better and do all of that. But what has happened apparently is, and we spoke about Thierry Henry, I was reading an article about Paul Pogba and how he was an Arsenal fan before because he really loved Thierry Henry. And then the love for Manchester United came later, which is fine.
Seconds. You can keep the seconds.
So, John, let's get into what happened before we get into the ESPN Star Sports days. I went on your Wikipedia page and it said there you were a radio DJ in college, which stunned me a little. And then you came to Asia and you even hosted, what was it, the Academy Awards over here? So that was a little stunning because we always thought of you as this sports guy who's been just giving us our football that we've been following for so long. But so how are you still DJing in clubs in Singapore maybe? Or do you still like to follow the Academy Awards and watch a lot of movies?
Okay, so first things first, it's funny whenever you guys, and I get this an awful lot from people from India in particular when I bump into people, they go, oh, I grew up watching you. And I always say, well, that goes two ways. One way, I'm really flattered, grateful, because it meant that, we really were there when football really grabbed a foothold in India. Secondly, it makes me feel really old when someone says I grew up. But unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that I'm no youngster, which means that if you're going to go back, way, way back to the things you were talking about then, I'll keep it short. I didn't grow up wanting to be a TV presenter. I didn't grow up thinking you could be a TV presenter. I went to college. I was doing an English degree course, but I love music. And I kind of like alternative, heavy rock, stuff like that. So I just signed up for the radio station and did a show. It was like an alternative music show when I was at college. I'd never done anything like that before, but they just stuck you in a studio and you learned your way around. And I thought, oh, okay, this is something I could do. I could talk. I discovered that I could string a few words together. So that was how I started off thinking, because I really didn't have any kind of career plans. I played sport all my life, but I knew I wasn't going to be a professional sports person, because by the time you get to early 20s and you're not, it's not going to happen. So I didn't think there'd be a career there. What I did do, though, was I went from doing the radio work to getting into newspapers. And my first real proper job was an English language paper in Hong Kong called South China Morning Post. And I started off as a kind of a junior writer, reporter on the sort of youth edition of the paper where I covered sport, because guys who ran the paper knew me because I played a bit of league cricket at the weekends and I knew a couple of guys on the sports desk there, and people just knew me. So, it was natural for me to do the sport. And then I graduated onto the main sports desk. So I started off as a sports writer. But the funny thing was, I just moved in circles where I knew a lot of people who worked on TV, in English language TV in Hong Kong, who were doing showbiz and entertainment stuff. And they knew that I came from a background where I'd done art stuff before. So I got a request from a TV magazine once asking if I would write movie reviews. So I started writing film reviews for them. And then the English language TV channel, TVB, came to me and said, hey, would you come on and be our movie review guy? So I initially said no. I said, no, I'm a journalist. I write stuff. I don't. TV's cheesy. I couldn't. I wouldn't know how to stare at a camera and talk. I can't do that. So, but they kept going on and they twisted my arm and they eventually got me on the show. And eventually they made me look at a camera and talk rather than being interviewed. So that's how it started. And what was fascinating back then was because if you worked on the main English language paper, the main English language entertainment magazine, and the main English language TV channel, it meant that you suddenly found yourself accelerated into positions that you'd ordinarily not be in. So within a short time, I was hosting a weekly sort of movie review show and TV show. I then was getting to go on junkets. And, you mentioned the Academy Awards. The Academy Awards actually wasn't the most glamorous thing I did, because all we did was we sat on top of a feed that came in from Hollywood. So all we did was we basically just filled the gaps, because they had slightly different commercial break lengths than the ones we did at the channel. So we just sort of, introed it, jumped in and out, just kept throwing back to Hollywood, basically. But the really fun stuff I did came when the movie distributors would go, well, we've got this guy here who writes for the paper and he works for the TV channel. So we think we've got enough budget to send him places and get some coverage. So I would go on junkets. So, and this is telling you how old I was. I was in the original Jurassic Park junket. So I was out in Los Angeles interviewing Laura Dern and Sam Neill.
That's amazing.
Guys like that, Jeff Goldblum. I went, they sent me to Tokyo where I interviewed Schwarzenegger and DeVito when they did Twins. I interviewed Tim Burton when he did Nightmare Before Christmas. So I did a lot of entertainment stuff. It was, that was really what I was doing. But I always played sport and I always had this kind of sports circle. And then funnily enough, there just came a time when I wanted to try and move on to the next thing, and it was more to do with production. So I went and joined a friend's company. I left the newspaper, and even though I still did movie shows in the evening, I went and worked for a company that produced sports programs. And I went in really and just learned the ropes in terms of, basics of production. And I was working on that show, and then it just kind of naturally pivoted from, I just moved back towards doing sport because I got a call from the company that was basically with Star Sports, but they were based in Hong Kong back then. And they sort of said, look, is it true? We've seen on the TV, is it true you know a thing or two about sport? And I went, yeah, I do a lot of sport. So I started commentating on Chinese soccer, Chinese football, the Chinese Super League for them. And then they said, well, do you know anything about cricket? I said, oh, yeah, big into cricket. So I went over and I started hosting cricket and did a weekly magazine show. I did football, obviously Asian Cup football. I did rugby. I did Formula One. And that took us up to 1997, which is when Star Sports and ESPN, who were based in Singapore, merged. They became a joint venture, ESPN Star Sports. And that's when I moved from Hong Kong to Singapore. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer, but it kind of takes you through this thing about showbiz. And no, I don't DJ. I do have. I still love my music, and my hobby, my biggest hobby, me and my wife in particular, is traveling to places to see bands. We go to rock festivals, we go to shows. That's our big indulgence away from sport.
Yeah, that reminds me that you and Sandeep have that very thing in common. Sandeep, for everyone who's listening, was my super boss where I used to work, and he introduced me to John. And I know he's heavily into alternative, heavy metal, and I think I've seen a couple of your pictures in Singapore when you made your way to the latest concert in town.
Yeah, it's funny there. I mean, Sandeep, that friend of yours, obviously he's a musician as well, so he's got far more cred than I. Because when I was growing up, I didn't learn an instrument; I was playing sport. No, I absolutely love it. And the funny thing about it is when you kind of look like this, when you look preppy and more like a sportsman than a rocker, people are always amazed when they find out that I'm going to go to a Trivium show or I like Megadeth or anything like that. So it always amuses people. But that's what I'm into.
That's awesome.
No, that's great. So now we'll get into the meat of it. We'll get into football. Okay, I'm going to hazard a guess here because where I see John sitting and I can see a blue jersey behind him with Dykes written on it. And I can't see the second digit, but it's 5. So I'm going to guess you're a Chelsea fan, John. It's 50. It's 50. So I'm going to guess that you're a Chelsea fan.
Okay, well, you can guess all you want. You can guess away. I'll give you the story behind that one. So it's funny, you guys think of me as the 2000s guy in terms of, I certainly was, because my time with the ESPN Star was 1997 to 2010. So really, we got into that whole Premier League broadcast from about 2001, 2002, all the way through. But then in 2010, I actually went to live in England because what happened was the Premier League launched its global channel, which of course you guys see on Star Sports. So I, funnily enough, went to live in England for 7 years. I did 7 seasons with the Premier League Productions, which is that global feed that they make out of the UK, which is not broadcast in England, but just it's a worldwide feed. So it broadcasts all around the world, including Singapore, where I live now, and obviously India, Africa, all over the place. It was very popular. But I went and lived in a place called Cobham, which you'll know as being where Chelsea's training ground is. And we happened to go there because there was an international school that we felt was a good place for our kids to go. My girls, I've got 2 daughters who both went to international school in Singapore, and we wanted to carry on. So anyway, we went there. It was also kind of convenient for work. It wasn't difficult to get into the studios from there. So I moved into this house, and I worked kind of odd hours, so I didn't really get to know the neighbors. But a month or 2 into it, I noticed there was this guy who used to drive back at slightly irregular hours, didn't work like 9-to-5 stuff, and he wore a tracksuit. And it turned out to be Steve Holland, who was the assistant manager at Chelsea. And Steve was my neighbor. He was renting this house next door to us. So Steve and his wife turned out to be lovely friends of ours, and the boys and the kids, got on well. So we became friends. And when I turned 50, which was in, what was that, in 2014. I went out just with a couple of friends, and Steve and his wife came along, and he brought me this amazing gift. And so this amazing gift was a Chelsea shirt that said Dykes 50. But the incredible thing about that was this was, November 2014. But it was that season 2014-15 when they went on to win the Premier League, which means that shirt behind me is signed by Mourinho, who was managing, of course, Drogba, Terry, Lampard had gone by then, as Mo Salah's name is on there, because Salah was there at that time. So I mean, it's an incredible thing, and it was just a gift because the guy worked for Chelsea. So that's what I got there. So again, not a Chelsea fan, but lots of Chelsea insights. I can give you that.
I love that T-shirt is signed by Drogba. It's just, I mean, for everyone who's watched all that, those insane games at the Champions League nights and Premier League games in the early 2010s. Drogba was a phenomenon. I mean, I'm not even going to start talking about Jose Mourinho just yet because we have a long way to go. So we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, but so let's get back to the early 2000s. Yeah, when I think Shivram and we both went to college together. That's where we met. We realized we started watching it at the same time. I think it was for most of us, at least here. It was, I think, in 2001 when Nistelrooy came to the Premier League and Arsenal were competing. I mean, with Manchester United, we had only. I remember once during a cricket match, and this is how I got into football personally. During a cricket match, Sunil Gavaskar was commentating, and he was talking about, like, forget this cricket match, it's Arsenal versus United tonight, and I need to watch this. Like that was the intent that he was talking with, and I was like, if Gavaskar can do this, so can I. So then we got into football, and your face, the face of Paul Macefield, of Shebby Singh, of Steve McMahon, it became so familiar. So all we want is to hear from you about like how those guys were to work with. What was your experience in those days? My favorite show, personally, I don't know about the other boys, but my favorite was Football Focus. I think it used to come on Tuesdays here. And I used to love your sit down like for an hour, 6 to 7 in the evening. It was every evening in India, and we used to sit, and it was too much fun.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just quickly take what we did. Once we landed the Premier League rights, and we had a whole Asia offering. I think when we first started, we went out to some 25, 26 countries, something like that. We threw a lot of money at it. We threw a lot of resources and a lot of expertise. We brought some great producers and some production talent to this from the UK. And so we launched a Friday night show, which was called Here We Go, which was like the preview show. Then it would be the big match days on Saturday and Sunday. Tuesday, we did indeed do Football Focus, and then we expanded the repertoire with some shoulder programming beyond that. But I mean, you mentioned those guys in Football Focus, but primarily what I did, of course, was the weekend stuff. Now, the weekend stuff was that live studio wrap around the matches. And that's obviously what I think that's my bread and butter. That's really what I love doing, that sort of live studio and on-site production. And, of course, what we did as well was we would bring out guests. So we would bring out the likes of, the late, great Sir Bobby Robson. Brian Robson came out and joined us, Ian Rush. We would have ex-players. We would have recently retired players or managers coming and joining us. And, of course, that was the sort of meat of what we did, that live stuff. We had the relationship with our sister company, Sky, which meant we could use their interviews pre and post match with Jeff Shreves and guys like that doing that. We had access to some of their content, some of those beautiful features they do and opening montages and stuff like that. So really that was the meat of it. But you're right. Football Focus took on a life of its own. When we first started, we were able to show highlights. It was a kind of a highlights-based chat show and what have you. But such is the nature of football and the rights industry that, by 3-year rights cycle, we might lose a territory here or there. We might lose Hong Kong or Singapore to another company or what have you, which meant that we wouldn't be able to show the footage but carry on broadcasting the show because obviously we wouldn't be the rights holder. So we took the decision. We thought, and I think we thought correctly, that the idea of me plus 4 opinionated, entertaining guests with no moving pictures whatsoever, just the odd graphic or a newspaper headline or an email with a question on it. We thought that would be enough with assumed knowledge. Everyone had seen the games. Everyone had seen the news. Everyone had followed up on all the stories. We thought, yeah, that'll do. We can build a show around this. And, and funny enough, that's what I'm doing today. So, fast forward all these years, and I'm effectively saying, right, there's an engaged and very football literate audience out there who have questions. We're also in a position where I, as a former journalist, I like to dig beneath stories and read between headlines and try and explain things and try to shoot down a few things. But the beautiful thing about Football Focus, as you said, was those guys. So the classic four, of course, would have been that sort of lineup when we had Steve McMahon. So you're talking about legendary Liverpool player, Paul Maysfield, gregarious character, ex-lower leagues footballer, larger than life, really, really sharp as you like. Chevy, the one and only Chevy Singh, Malaysian former international footballer, absolute lover of the game, and completely opinionated. And then Jamie Reeves. Now, Jamie Reeves was a former semi-pro footballer who actually worked as an economics lecturer in Singapore, but was the voice of reason, sensible, calm, very much intellectual. And it was just a lovely little blend that I thought worked really nicely. And I love being in there, just prompting them and asking questions.
Yeah, I think what you just essentially described was a podcast before podcast came to be. That is literally that. No moving pictures. There's no footage. You're literally talking about the game and actually being purists about it, which is fantastic, which is what everyone wants to hear about. Plus, you have four amazing guests who are...
And they're all better looking than the three of us, so it works on a television show.
Better look.
They'll all take that. I'm definitely going to give them that one. Someone asked me this the other day. Someone was talking about podcasts, and I tend to play devil's advocate. And I said, let's not get too carried away. I mean, sorry, with respect, guys, podcast is podcast now. I mean, effectively, as you just said, it's exactly what we were doing. There used to be this thing called radio, where people sat around talking about stuff. There used to be these things called long form interviews. Whether I did it as a print journalist, or whether I recorded it for sound or vision, or both. I mean, it's nothing new here. It's just that it's a delivery mechanism, and thankfully, with the pod, that's the way we do it now.
That's awesome. We also have a story about Chevy Singh because back in 2010, 2011, was it? Blackburn had come down to Pune in India, and they were playing. I think they were playing Pune FC. And Karthik and I had the opportunity because our university was very close to the stadium. So we had the opportunity to go there. And back then I used to work with this website called goal.com. I used to be a contributor on the site and I was basically reporting on the game. And I had the opportunity to meet the only Galacticos player I ever met, which was Michel Salgado. And the bunch of players that I looked up to, Montgams Pedersen, of course, Chevy Singh was there, and Bhaichung Bhutia also ended up showing up at the game. So those are fond memories. And of course, Venki and so on and so forth. But that brings back that memory of just watching that game live.
Yeah, I think Gaurav, you spotted a photo recently of John with Chevy, right? Like
with Chevy Singh, yeah. I think so. It's not a recent picture. I'm guessing it's not a recent picture, but I did see a picture of the both of you. Hanging out.
No, I work with Chevy. So Chevy predominantly lives in Malaysia, which is just across the causeway from Singapore here. But he comes down and works on Fox all the time. He's a regular part of the punditry team. We show Bundesliga football. We show Asian football. We have the AFC competitions, and he's. I mean, all the time that I was in England, apart from this spell when he was working with Blackburn, he's always carried on being a pundit. So Chevy and I, we bump into each other regularly. Paul Maysfield, as you know, spends a lot of time in India now, obviously with his commitments on TV there. But Paul also works mainly as a commentator with us these days. Jamie comes in and co-commentates. Jamie Reeves occasionally, and I still see him around Singapore quite often. So yeah, we're still pretty much in touch. Steve McMahon's gone back to the UK now after a spell. I think he was in Singapore for a long time. Then he went up to Kuala Lumpur for a bit. But yeah, we're still pretty much in touch.
Yeah, and lastly, I think before we just head into a break, we'll finish this with a few more familiar faces. Like, of course, you were the face of ESPN Star, but then there were the likes of Colette Wong, Andy Penders, Jason Dacey. In fact, Jason, I work with ESPN Info, so Jason and I still do a lot of work together. Like, so are you still in touch with them? Like, they too, I mean, I don't know. I think, Jason, you may probably be in the same age group and you'll have come through together. So how was that equation there? And I remember Andy Penders was this fun guy on football crazy.
Nokia Football Crazy. That's
crazy.
The only reason I remember Nokia, because of Football Crazy.
Yeah. Oh, come on, give him a break. I love my Nokias. I still have this real fondness for my N71 or something like that. I think it was. I used to be a maniac at texting. I loved it. Anyway, Okay, so let's put it into context. So what happened was ESPN Star, we spread stuff across the ESPN network, the Star network. We had a lot of channels. We had a lot of content. Jason was a news guy, Jason Dacey. He'd come from working on sort of, BBC, CNN, places like that. So he was more on the news side of things because we showed Sports Center. We made a Singapore-based regional sports center. So Jason basically worked on the news team, as did Colette Wong. Now, Colette is Singaporean, and she'd come through broadcasting in Singapore. And I'm delighted to say Colette still works with me. She's a big part of what we do at Fox Sports.
Oh, wow.
And I was talking to her just this morning. So she's just fantastic. So she's still presenting all sorts. She presents football stuff. She presents golf, tennis. So she's really awesome. Versatile. Andy Penders. So what happened with Andy? Andy came along. Andy was part of our digital team in the early days at ESPN. And we had the website back then. But Andy was also from a kind of a football fan cast kind of background. He was just tailor-made for it. So when we decided that we were so established, we had all of our, I suppose we'd call them kind of dry, serious, heavyweight shows like the ones I was doing, all very sort of sensible and serious. We, a bit like Sky with their Soccer AM, said, well, we need to branch out of it. We need to have a sort of a more youth-oriented, fun show. And Andy was the ideal guy to do that. He brought so much to it in terms of energy and ideas. So Andy did it. He worked with Colette on that.
PJ Roberts?
I think, PJ was there. PJ had been a pro playing here in Singapore. PJ's still around. PJ is a pundit on Fox. He pops up on Fox still these days, but he's got other business concerns of his own. So anyway, Andy Penders is doing very well for himself. He's basically turned himself into a really good content producer, and he works on the Malaysian Football League, the Super League up in Malaysia, primarily, but he does a whole bunch of content. So if you guys look him up on social media, he puts some pretty cool stuff out.
That's great. While, as much as I don't want to, we need to listen to some ads. So we'll be right back.
Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Don Bradman, and now Cyrus Brocha. Okay, probably not in the right company. I mean, Don Bradman is Australian. But it's called Cyrus Says, a wonderful show about everything. Find the show on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Okay, welcome back to Football Shootball with the man who brought us the two protagonists of the 2000s, Manchester United and Arsenal. He brought us the battle at Old Trafford, the Invincible, Pizzagate even. Okay, John, we're going to put you on the spot right here because Shivram wants us to ask this question.
Yes.
Are the Invincibles the greatest team the Premier League has ever seen?
Whoa, here we go. This is amazingly good timing. This week on my show on Fox, John Dykes show, we've done two specials. One of them was a kind of serious one about the problems facing Arsenal right now. It went out on last night's episode, and we were looking at this pay cut and everything like that and talking about how they've fallen. They're out of the European competitions, down in ninth place, struggling to really justify themselves in terms of their wage bill. But the other show that we did is one we pre-recorded for the Friday show, with Adrian Clark, who is a former Arsenal player, and he's like a Premier League tactics expert. And we talked about the Invincibles, and we talked about the Invincibles season, but we did it in such a way that we looked at the context behind it, we looked at their achievements, and then we asked the question, could it happen again? And when you do stuff like that, it makes you think in a little bit more detail about them. I'd always been wary. I'd always sort of had this thing about all the games they drew that season. What was it, 12 games? I'm thinking to myself, okay. And I was looking at Liverpool crushing all their numbers this year. But then I thought to myself, yeah, but Liverpool lost after 27 games. And then I threw together a graphic that showed that someone else had made it to 24. No one else had made it beyond 15. And it got me thinking, wow, that's another way. Maybe whether you call them the greatest ever team or the greatest ever champions. I think it may be a question of semantics. I think they're the greatest champions because they've done something that hasn't been done. City have been brilliant and they threatened to do it, but didn't. Liverpool have been incredible, but didn't do it. Manchester United had a spell between 2006 and 2009 when I think arguably, they were just playing this unbelievably great football. But for Arsenal to do what they did, and then I looked at the team, and I would be hard-pressed really to pick better strikers than Henry and Bergkamp. I think if you look at what they did defensively, only 26 goals conceded. They only allowed, I think, 48 shots in the whole season. So you had that sort of Gilberto Silva, Vieira screen in front of the defense. You had that incredible Ashley Cole, Pires, Henry left side, which was so productive. It created about 50% of the assists. And then you're looking at Ljungberg, and you're just looking throughout the team, and man, it was a good team. So I'm coming around more and more to, there may have been teams that had more individual flair. There may have been teams that had a certain period when they were great. And I think with United, everyone gets fixated on, the Ronaldo, Rooney, Tevez, and what have you. But
right.
That happened over a period for me of 2 or 3 seasons. I just think in the isolated context of one season, i.e. the champions, I'm going to give it to Invincibles.
Fantastic. I think we should just wrap up this show now. I think we have our answer. I think we're good.
No, that's great. And then moving on after that period, there was this young plucky Portuguese who had just won the Champions League. He came up into the Premier League. I mean, I've written the question down in the doc as, did you know it was a special period? But I think in Jose's first press conference, Sapre, Gaurav, he said it by himself. No, like what were his exact words?
Yeah, he said, "I am the special." I don't think he left too many things for the presenters and the pundits to say. I don't think he likes to do that.
I'm going to interrupt you because I think this is one of those. It's not a bugbear. It's not a bugbear. It's just like a little thing, right? So if you actually go back and find that first interview, he never said, "I'm the special one." The newspapers called him the special one, and that one has always existed ever since. What he actually said was, he said something, and I'm paraphrasing, and you can go and find the original quote. He said, "Right, what you're looking at here isn't one of those blah 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 managers. It isn't da 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 da. What you've got here is a special one, a special one." And what he was doing was he was trying to sort of explain himself, how he was different, that he had come from a different background, that he had different motivations and what have you. But tabloids loved, of course, to spin things around. So it became, Mourinho claimed, "I am the special one." No, he didn't. No, he just said, "I'm not that manager. I'm a special one." And then he became known as the special one, and that's taken on a life of its own. But that's not to put them down at all. Yeah, I'm gonna probably make everybody happy at some stage during this chat, because I think this conversation is talking about a period when Arsenal had just done something stunning. Mm-hmm. And then it was Chelsea that came. Because remember, the backdrop to Arsenal's title triumph as Invincibles was that Abramovich had come along.
Correct.
And was just buying everybody. So then what did Arsenal do? They responded. But sorry, I interrupted you. You were talking about Mourinho, right?
Yeah. I think in one of the previous episodes, we spoke about one season blunders, players who had come in for one season, didn't do too good. And we did speak about Adrian Mutu. And little shout out to, I think, Shevchenko, both of them during the Abramovich era. But Mourinho's Chelsea fundamentally changed the rivalry that Arsenal and United had and the success that they had before. United still continued that success for a while. Arsenal never managed to win the Premier League after that. What was it that for you, and we've heard a lot from Jose and from other pundits, and a lot of articles have been written about what Chelsea really did, but most of it talks about the amount of money that came in. We personally don't believe. I think United had equal, if not more, money to spend. They had a decent amount of players, so did Arsenal. But what was that which Jose got to the Chelsea team, which ensured that they continued success for over a period of time?
Well, I think the other thing as well is you've got to give Ranieri a little bit of credit as well, because Ranieri had built a pretty solid foundation for the team. But then when you look at the signings, the problem was, and I was there when Chelsea first had all that money. In fact, they did the very first ever Asia Trophy pre-season tournament, and there were kind of new players just getting off the plane day by day. The squad had arrived, and suddenly it was like, here's Damien Duff arriving, and here's someone else. Wayne Bridges just arrived. And what happened was they just wanted to buy players, and when you do that, there's going to be hits and misses. So they found their way. But what happened with Jose, and I think this is where you have to give them massive credit, was they got that synergy between recruitment and coaching. Absolutely right. And I think that doesn't happen very often. It happened with David Dein and Arsene Wenger at Arsenal. It obviously happened with Ferguson back in the day at Manchester United. But what was fascinating was that the players that came in were just absolutely right. But allied to that, they had this foundation, particularly in terms of Terry and Lampard, right? So they had that solidity there. But then in recruiting, Czech came in from French football and just turned out to be the best goalkeeper of that decade, without any doubt, I think. He came in then all the way through the team, whether it was just stopgap signings who only had a year or two, or whether it was like longer term signings, or whether it was a very raw Didier Drogba who just turned into this absolute, monster of a striker. Everything just seemed to work. And the key to it was Jose could back up everything because his scouting of opposition was so good, because his tactical awareness was good, his man management must have been fantastic to get out of them what he did, that he could go to his boss and say, I think what we need to do now is we need to spend money and get this one in, and that's what happened. So I think in their own ways, Arsene Wenger revolutionized English football, and then Jose Mourinho did. But it was a very different way. And in a way, we saw perversely a kind of echo in it of Manchester City. Massive funding, plus a very specifically tactically oriented coach coming along as well to implement the ideas with that money behind them. So that's what made Mourinho such a game changer, I think.
This quickly reminds me about a cool story that I think we should absolutely tell you. So you know that I support Arsenal. You already know that Sapre supports Manchester United. We haven't discussed which team Karthik supports, and one name stood out for me in the list of players that Chelsea bought was Damien Duff. Damien Duff played for this little club called Fulham, and we have this cool story which Karthik, do you want to do the honors?
Yeah, so I think if you lived in Chelsea, you would have probably stayed near Craven Cottage as well, which makes me so jealous, John. But yeah. So no, it was. I think going back to the point when Shivram and I started watching football, it was in 2001. It was when Fulham got promoted in the Premier League. They came in there. They had this amazing jersey with like a black sleeve and just white. And I think the following season they had Pizza Hut, and that was one brand I knew. I didn't know what Sharp was. I didn't know whatever the other brands the clubs were. But I knew what Pizza Hut was. It was my aspiration to get a pizza like every week once. So that's the club I've been following since. But yeah, I mean, I think what really struck out there was you mentioned that the noughties, that decade in football was so power packed. Now, maybe it's nostalgia talking here, but we did a team of the decade as every other media organization did of the 2010s. And there was a few debates, but there wasn't as many as if we had tried the same thing for the 2000s. Now, we've been arguing about this year, and we thought you're the best person to settle these debates for us. Okay, so I'm going to go here. So who was the best striker of the 2000s? I think it was Fernando Torres, just seeing the way he plays. Gaurav is obviously Van Nistelrooy, and Shiva is an Henry guy. So we want you to help us settle this debate.
I'm sorry, I'm just stepping in, but there is only one picture hanging behind John Dykes right now.
I could give you the whole team if you want, but I'll tell you my two strikers. My two strikers would be Henry and Drogba.
No, if you're going to give us the team, please do so. That would be awesome.
Okay. Well, funnily enough, you can talk about the 2010s being easy. I disagree. I think that the 2000s, the 2000s was an awesome decade for football. I'll make Gaurav happy in a minute because, I'll talk about the fact that I think actually if you had to pick a manager of that decade, I'd still pick Sir Alex Ferguson. And what I would do is if you wanted to pick a team, I would go with Cech in goal. I would go Ashley Cole left back without any doubt. I'd go Gary Neville right back. Easy, I think. I think Ferdinand has to be as one. And then it's a question of, do you go with Campbell? Do you go with... I go with Terry. I'm going to go with John Terry in there. So I'd have Ferdinand and Terry, much as they might not like it, playing alongside one another.
There's four English defenders.
There is four English defenders. I was just about to say that.
That certainly wouldn't happen these days, would it? No chance. Mm-hmm. And then I think I would go with Scholes in midfield. I would go with Lampard and Gerrard. And even though he wasn't there for that long, he was just so amazing. I'd have Cristiano Ronaldo in there. And then I'd have Drogba and Henry up top.
Wow.
Easy.
There's only one Arsenal player in there, John.
No, there's Ashley Cole. I mean, he did play for Arsenal.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, and there's Petr Cech who played for Arsenal later.
I tell you why we have to have the conversation about the whole decade. When we do this thing about decades, very often you blur stuff, right? You've got that rating towards the start of the decade or the end of the decade. So, for example, Henry was in his pomp at the start of the decade. Drogba, arguably from the midway point onwards, right? So you've got to bear that in mind. But I think the other thing you have to bear in mind is that you must have a significant Manchester United representation in there, because if you think about it, you had Arsene Wenger leading Arsenal to an invincible season, right? Doing just incredible, unprecedented, and never repeated things. You had Mourinho coming along, and the whole revolution that Chelsea did with successive title triumphs. But who ended up winning 5 Premier Leagues in a decade? Sir Alex Ferguson, Manchester United. Which just goes to tell you what an incredible decade it was, and how you have to show a lot of respect to Manchester United, and therefore they have to really populate that team, I think, quite extensively, or as much as you can. But Van Nistelrooy, I just looking at the longevity of Henry and Drogba and just giving them the edge.
No, I will not disagree with that line.
Of course you won't. John's just taken the wind out of my sails for the next many arguments.
No, but I love this, where we started part 1 by praising the Invincibles, by praising Henry. We're ending part 1 by saying Manchester United were the best team of the decade. We'll never know. John, we're going to have you for another week, but thank you so much for joining us this week on Football Shootball. Until next time.
So if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I'm Fickleberry Hun on Twitter and Instagram. That's Huckleberry Finn, but Fickle.
And if you want to reach out to me, I am Sapre on Twitter and G Sapre on Instagram.
You can reach out to me at iRant, which is IYERANT on Twitter and Instagram. This is Football Shootball. Recognize.
How many times have you motivated yourself to improve your sleep or lose weight or be more productive? How many times have you failed? Hi, my name is Ashton Doctor. Tune into my show, The Habit Coach Podcast, where we focus on creating small, tiny habits to improve your life instead of those big, impossible tasks. So make listening to me a habit every Monday, Wednesday and Friday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or on your favorite podcasting app.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.